You're listening to the Face Value Podcast, episode 151, The Whale, Fatphobic Misery Porn.
Perfect.
Hello, welcome to this podcast episode. I'm your host, Vinnie Wellesby, pronouns they, them. I am going to be talking about the movie The Whale today. And so because of that, huge trigger warnings on a lot of really awful fat phobia and talking about those depictions of fat bodies, brief mention of eating disorders, talking about food. It's is the feeling of today. So if you're not feeling like you want to hear that stuff today, then come back next episode. But yeah, the film came out this week, a few days ago, and so we've got some reviews that have come out. I want to talk about those, and also the depiction of fatness and those who are who don't leave their homes for whatever reason, whether that's agoraphobia or inaccessibility, disability, etc. In North America, I've heard the phrase shut in, but I think that is probably stigmatizing. So I'm just going to say people who stay in their homes. But the idea of the way that fatness is depicted as these fat people are in their homes and don't leave, and how in The Whale and in a couple of other instances I'm going to give you the way that is depicted and the reasons why that isn't so great. Obviously we love fat representation, but unfortunately we've got a lot of fat suits and stuff. So yeah, before we get started, I wanted to give you a little bit of joy, a little bit of happiness. Before I do that, a reminder about the vacation to the Dominican Republic. If you have any questions, let me know. This is Fierce Fatty Vacation. We have 5 early bird spots left now. So if you want to get an early bird spot, which is $100 cheaper, then go to the link in the show notes, or go anywhere you can find me. There'll be a link somewhere for our Dominican Republic fat vacation. But yeah, the thing that I was like, there's a little bit of joy is there's an artist on the social medias who sings songs, and I wanted to tell you about her. Her name is Mother Moon, and you can find Mother Moon on Spotify and I guess other places that music lives. And this is one of her songs. You might have heard of it, and it goes, I think it's called I Love My Body. I love my body from my head to my toes. I love my face, my eyes, my mouth, my nose. I love the way I look when I look in the mirror. I stand a little closer just to see a little clearer. I hope you do too. You're worthy of your own love, it is true. So what do we say? We tell ourselves we love us every day. So you might have heard that song. She's got another one which is about loving your belly, and it's just so cute. Like, so if you've got kids, or if you're like me and don't have kids but find it healing and nice and cute, it was actually one of my nibblings' birthdays this week, and I did a little recording of me singing that song to her, and she liked it. So Mother Moon on the Instagrams. I'll link to that in the show notes. fizfactory.com/151. Mother Moon, what else I was going to do? DR. Alright, and then links to everything else that we're talking about today in the show notes. So I want to read a few pieces, people's initial reactions to The Whale. I was trying to find a pirated copy because I was like, I am not going to the movies and giving this film my money, because unless someone's paying me to write an article or whatever, no, I can't. I feel I can't do it. And to be seen in the cinema watching The Whale, I just can't. And to see, white people in there being like, oh, it's so moving how disgusting fat people are. So I was trying to find a pirated copy, but couldn't find one because I think it's because it's new out only a few days ago, and I could probably find, if I kept looking, I could probably find it. But it's probably a good thing that I didn't, because I bought a copy of What's Eating Gilbert Grape, which is another movie that I want to mention today, and I sped watched that, and going through the research for today, I noticed that I was like, oh, I'm internalizing fat bias, because I was about to record the podcast. I'd been working on this, and I was in the zone, the zone where you just so hyper focused, and you're like, oh my God, I really need to do a wee, but you're like, no, I just 10 more minutes, and you're just like, eventually you're like, okay, fine, I have to get up because I'm gonna piss myself. So the zone. And then I was like, okay, well, I've done it now, and I'll just bust out the episode. And then I was like, oh no, actually, I'm really hungry. I should eat some lunch. And then my brain was like, just don't. And I was like, yeah, I know what I mean. It's just so, I can't be bothered to make food. And then the other side of my brain was like, it's self-care. Make some lunch. You're really hungry. What was coming up was a lot of the stuff, the way that fatness is depicted in these shows. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff around food. And even someone like me who has done so many years of work on that, how quickly that kind of seeped into my brain. And I think the difference now is that I'm very easily able to go, should I actually not eat lunch because I'm one of these depictions, and I shouldn't because I'm not allowed to, and or should I just nourish myself and self-care and just basic things of needing to be alive? Yes, I should do that, but it really made me think about how for others who are maybe newer on their journey, or anyone else with a human brain who lives in a bigger body, or even not, how all of this stuff is directly harmful to us. And of course, everyone else, like their mental health might be in different places, and it might be more harmful to others and less, and maybe not even harmful to some folks. But it was, so interesting how we know this stuff is harmful, and seeing it in action in my beautiful brain, I was like, no, I'm gonna eat some fucking lunch, then do the podcast. And it's okay if the sun sets during me recording the podcast, because it's the winter and sunset's just early. But anyway, so yeah, all that to say, blah 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 bloop bloop, trigger warning. And also if you're feeling like shit afterwards listening to this stuff, or feeling angry or whatever, I don't know, give yourself some self-care. So the first thing that I want to quote from is a piece called The Exhausting Fat Phobia of the Whale by Victoria Edel. And Victoria says, Brendan Fraser's, apparently there's this whole thing of Brendan Fraser has been saying that everyone's been pronouncing his name incorrectly for many years. And I was like, really? Fraser? How are you pronouncing Fraser wrong? And apparently people call him Frasier. And I was like, look at me, I'm one of the people that has pronounced it correctly because it's spelt Fraser, right? So anyway, if you're pronouncing it Frasier, like it's got an I in there, it's actually Fraser. So anyway, Brendan Fraser comeback film, The Whale, has made tons of headlines thanks to people's excitement over seeing his return to screens. He's received emotional standing ovations at film festivals, reunited with former co-stars. They've been candid about his life and career journey during his press tour. And yet, The Whale, released by A24 and directed by Darren Aronofsky, is very bad. In the movie, Fraser plays Charlie, a gay, fat man who is estranged from his teenage daughter and supports himself by teaching writing classes over Zoom. He loves writing and reading, though we never actually see him do any. So that first paragraph, that last line, we never actually see him do any, is the first issue with these types of films, these fatphobic misery porn films, is it paints fat characters in a very two-dimensional way. Fat people who stay in their homes, seemingly their sole purpose is to eat food, eat lots of food, and then maybe have some what others perceive as undignified pursuits, like watching daytime TV or masturbating or stockpiling food, right? That is what we know about fat folks, and especially fat folks who live in their homes and for whatever reason, due to disability or mental health issues or whatever it is, right? That's the character. Food and something, their personality is something else, like something unintellectual, right? Even though the character Charlie is a teacher, clearly knows enough to be a teacher, yet he doesn't pursue that himself. Apparently, his life is masturbating and eating food. And eating food in a really gratuitous way, right? Something that I noticed was when I was on that TV show, The O Word, the way they portrayed the fat folks who liked being fat with food and versus the fat folks who didn't like being fat is that we all would eat the exact same thing, right? And they would show me, as a fat person who likes being fat, eating the quote unquote unhealthy food. And then you would see the good fatties drinking a glass of water, eating a salad, even though I'd been eating the same dinner with a salad, but they wouldn't show that, right? And that is often, almost exclusively, the way that fat people are portrayed with food, is eating food that is perceived as unhealthy or bad in some way, and also becoming animalistic around that food, becoming overcome with desire for the food, that all awareness of their surrounding is gone because they're just gobbling it down so quickly, and grease dripping down their face and stains on their clothes, and that is what is happening in The Whale. Charlie is eating, a bucket of chicken. Could you get any more fatphobic, tropey bucket of chicken? And eating food feverishly, eating food so quickly that he chokes. So to me, that sounds like Charlie might have an eating disorder. Doesn't that sound like, as listeners to the show, if you have listened to the show, does it sound like maybe Charlie has something going on? Something, disordered eating behaviors, eating disorder, or perhaps, if it's not a problem for him, perhaps that's just, the way he eats and it's not an issue for him. But why is it that is just eating like that is framed as an exclusively fat, quote, problem versus just fat people just eating food the way that everyone eats food? And that means to say that sometimes fat people eat food in that way. It's, I think, obviously amped up for the camera, because fat people can have eating disorders, and thin people can have eating disorders and eat food in that way. And also, the majority of fat people don't have eating disorders because the majority of humans don't have eating disorders, and eat exactly like thin people. But that doesn't make entertainment, does it? It doesn't make an entertaining movie. If you just saw Charlie in The Whale, having a nice, chicken salad with some freshly baked bread, that wouldn't satisfy the thin viewer to say, phew, I'm not going to be in the same predicament as Charlie because I don't eat the same way he does. I'm not, I don't have grease dribbling down my face, and I'm not walking around in stained clothes from the food that I'm eating. I'm not an animal. So it's that distancing. It's making fat people inhuman and a spectacle of, let's gawk at this poor unfortunate soul. Let's continue from Victoria's piece. Charlie calls himself disgusting multiple times, and the camera agrees with him. The viewer is invited to gawk at Charlie. Every time he rises from the couch, the music swells as if he was the literal whale of the movie's title, rising above the waves. Charlie's apartment is depressing. His clothes are always sweaty and greasy. His hair is terrible. He has accessibility devices to help him get through his routine, but they are all jerry-rigged and look like they are falling apart. He's judged for using them at all. Every time Charlie yells or laughs or grunts or groans, it turns into a coughing attack. Yeah. And that again speaks to the two-dimensional characters that we see with fat folks. And when we have these stories of fat people portrayed by people who are not sharing the same identities, and people will say, well, Brendan Fraser, he's fat. He's not the size of Charlie, right? Charlie in the story is apparently 600 pounds. And that has never been Brendan Fraser's experience. He has not lived Charlie's life, or he would not need to be wearing a fat suit. The original writer of the play that the book was based on, he was fatter in his younger life, and then apparently lost weight. He too was never the size of Charlie. He too didn't live the life of Charlie. He too was not disabled. He too was not living in his home and not coming out. So because this story is written by people and acted and produced, directed by people who do not have that lived experience, they cannot portray fatness in its reality. And fatness in its reality is things like fatphobia and ableism and lack of good healthcare and discrimination and accessibility issues, all that type of stuff. And it's joyous, and it's, you know, fat people have wonderful lives and are happy and are smart and are interesting and all of the same things that the rest of humanity is. But that doesn't make good viewing. We are told by the director that this is an act of empathy making by watching this film. Potentially it could be empathy making if we had a character that wasn't framed in such a fatphobic way, you know, wasn't framed as pitiful. That's it exactly, pitiful. Because of course, you know, there can be people that you pity, but really, is that the full story to people? And what is it doing by continuing to present stories of fat people who are pitiful? Is that really, is that fat liberation? Or is it the same old tired, boring trope that we have seen for ages? Because this is nothing new, right? This is nothing new. This is my £600 life, but, you know, with millions of dollars spent to make it into a film. And that show is fucked up. So that was from Pop Sugar, Victoria Edel. And we have something from Slant Magazine, Fatphobia Sinks Darren Aronofsky's Drama by Mark Hansen. Mark Hansen is a thin, young, white man, which was really interesting to see that he was able to pick out the fact that this was fucked up. Okay, so this is what Mark Hansen says for Slant Magazine. Throughout, Aronofsky invites us to gawk at Fraser's prosthetic enhanced appearance as his character showers, masturbates, and precariously moves around his rundown Idaho apartment with the aid of a rickety walker. When the man binges on meatball sandwiches or chocolate bars, it's shot and scored with the bombastic revulsion of a horror movie. But considering how Depict, so Depict is the cinematographer for the film, considering how Depict's camera leeringly treats Charlie as an unsightly object of pity throughout, it's difficult to deny the film's fatphobia, though its mawkishness is no less oppressive. Aronofsky may think he's presenting some kind of radically cathartic journey throughout The Whale, but all he's doing is bringing a hollow sense of dignity to his schematic brand of cinematic misery porn. Misery porn is, by the way, the genre of, you know, people's stories of experiencing, you know, hard things, hardship, and terrible things. A lot of the books that I would have read in my younger years would be like people's experience of overcoming child abuse, and so that would be classed as misery porn. And misery porn is not necessarily a bad thing or anything. It's when, for this, you know, misery porn in regards to look how miserable a fat person's life is. A fat person who has a potential eating disorder and potential mental health issues and mobility issues and lacking connection with people. Like, it's just, and told by thin people. It's just not good. My favorite piece that I saw in response to The Whale came from Roxane Gay. Roxane Gay is the person who wrote Bad Feminist and other things. And I've got a link to the article because it's behind a paywall from the New York Times. If you ever want to find something behind a paywall, go to archive.ph and put the link in there, archive.ph. And then it will give you a screenshot of the article from whenever it was last archived on the web. Okay, so I'm going to give you some quotes from The Cruel Spectacle of the Whale, Roxane Gay. It's a short piece, but I think you should go and read the whole thing. The Whale, Darren Aronofsky's latest film, is one you hope desperately will be seen by an audience that has the necessary cultural literacy, the empathy to watch the story and recognize that the on-screen portrayal of fatness bears little resemblance to the lived experience of fat people. It is gratuitous, self-aggrandizing fiction at best. The disdain the filmmakers seem to have for the protagonist is constant and inescapable. For most of its 2-hour runtime, The Whale is emotionally devastating. Charlie's grief and inability to find the will to live is utterly crushing. It is overwhelming and relentless, manipulative and pitiable. I suppose that's the point of this particular adaptation from Sam Hunter's play of the same name. Okay, continuing. I'm picking out my favorite quotes here. Mr. Fraser brings pathos to the role, though I wish he was given better material, more worthy of his talent. His performance makes him a strong contender for all the major awards, and that's a shame. Not because he doesn't deserve them, but because what's also being rewarded is such a demeaning portrayal of a fat man. We will hear about how brave Mr. Fraser is for taking on a role like this, for wearing a fat suit, for being willing to embody so many people's worst fears. Hollywood loves to reward actors who dare to take on roles that require them to abandon the good looks that enabled their careers. Yeah, and the thing is, like, Brendan Fraser, all power to him, and, what a great story that he's coming back and he is in a bigger body now, and he's being embraced by Hollywood. If he had that same body when he was younger, would he have even ever got a role? Nope. So it's his thin privilege that has made him get to this point in the first place. But, I feel nothing but, good for him vibes. And it's unfortunate that he is not able to speak up to fatphobia versus doing this. Anyway, continuing. At points, I was reminding of Leaving Las Vegas, which is another film. That film is so... it's really hard for me to watch that. And how Ben Sanderson, played by Nicolas Cage, is afforded a kind of dignity as he drinks himself to death. He is part of the world even as he forces his way out of it. Charlie is not granted any such thing. The Whale claims to have been told with care and grace, but it's just as exploitative as any episode of TLC's My 600-Pound Life. In the opening scene, it isn't quite clear what is happening until everything comes into focus. Charlie is masturbating to porn, drenched in sweat, out of breath. It's unclear what will happen first, orgasm or death. The problem isn't that Charlie looks the way he does or struggles in his body. The problem is that the creators cannot hide their contempt anytime Charlie tries to satisfy an all-too-human urge. So many other creative choices feel unnecessary. In one scene, Charlie, in a fit of emotional pain, gorges himself on any food he can find, starting with a greasy pizza. Before long, his face is slicked with grease and he has thrown open his refrigerator, desperate for anything to fill the yawning void of hurt from which he cannot escape. There is another scene in which he eats a bucket of fried chicken. And then there's his wardrobe, tent-like clothing, threadbare, perpetually soaked in sweat, the rolls of his stomach spilling over his thighs, the walker he cannot move without, always by his side, as he heaves himself up each time he needs to change locations. The way The Whale is told reflects such a profound and pathetic dearth of imagination. At several points, my wife and I wanted to walk out of the screening, but we didn't want to seem rude or oversensitive. So Roxanne was at a screening with the director. And she says as well in the article, she looked around and there was only about 4 people who was fat in the cinema and not a single fat person on stage afterwards when they did the Q&A. I mean, shit, I would have wanted to walk out too. And also wouldn't have wanted to seem rude or oversensitive. In the Q&A after the screening, the director, Mr. Aronofsky, said proudly that Charlie's story was told with empathy. The Whale, in the end, isn't the serious film it so desperately wants to be. It's a carnival sideshow. Come look at the freak, the movie beckons. That's the thing. And as well, why I was like, at that. Aronofsky saying it was told with empathy. And fat people have said, excuse me, Darren, this is fatphobic. This is not empathetic. This is harmful and not appreciated by the fat community. And in articles that's come out since, in the last few days, he said, don't know what you're talking about. It is empathetic. I mean, if a marginalized group says, we don't like this is fucked up, you sit down and listen, even if you don't understand, even if you genuinely thought that you did an amazing job and that you deeply admire the group that you're talking about or whatever, and your intentions were pure, doesn't matter. Sit down and listen to the community that you are portraying. And you say that you are portraying in an empathetic way. Really, this is just like a basic, 101 how to be a human. If someone says this is not good from the community you're portraying, then you just have to say, I fucked up. But for whatever reason, he can't do that. And this is really making me think about Saki or Sarah Bartman, which was she was the Khoikhoi woman who was exhibited as a freak show carnival attraction in the 19th century in Europe, and was named the Hottentot Venus, and because of her body size. And then after her death, her body was displayed in a museum, and that is she's a black woman, and obviously this is racism, because obviously this is exploitation and the dehumanization of black people. And I mean, this is she was born in 1789, and Saki was also displayed alongside animals. And we think about the way that, and by the way, she's fat. Okay, in case I didn't mention that, but in case that wasn't explicit. But yeah, her body and personhood was that word again that a few people have used, gawked at, and dehumanized. This fatness, this blackness, this otherness that us thin white people could either feel pity for or disgust, use it as a form of entertainment to say, oh, at least we're not like that. And the way it's being framed is not, hey, look at this diversity in humans, and isn't it beautiful and wonderful? And no, it's a freak show. And if there's modern freak shows where people are empowered by that word, and that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about people who were Saki was coerced into showing her body, and I wonder how much, if any, free will was there, and I wonder too, with shows like My 600 Pound Life, the coercion of that show, and the fact that presumably those people get paid in My 600 Pound Life, and being 600 pounds or thereabouts is means it's difficult to get work. And so how much consent is in that storytelling? Probably not a lot. So thinking about this, also I'm thinking about other ways that fat people have been depicted in cinema in the same way that Brendan Fraser's character Charlie has been. And two similar types of depictions of the person who is living primarily in their home and not leaving, and has a big body, a very big body. The two things that I thought of was What's Eating Gilbert Grape and Seven. Remember them movies? You might not. So yeah, I remember seeing both of them as a younger person. They both came out in the 90s, right? When did Seven come out? I think What's Eating Gilbert Grape was 94. Seven. Okay, so Seven was 95. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? And the portrayal of fatness and being homebound in those films were, especially in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, was that framing of compassion. But it's only when you look a little, you just scratch the surface a little bit, and you can see that there is no compassion there. It is deeply cruel. So What's Eating Gilbert Grape, it's also really ableist because it stars a young Leonardo DiCaprio as a child with an intellectual disability, playing a role of someone who is disabled, and so it's fucked up already on that. But we have the film is about Johnny Depp, creep, and Johnny Depp is Gilbert Grape, and he lives in this small town in the States, and he has a very fat mum. And so we start the movie with an introduction to who he is, his siblings. He's got Leonardo DiCaprio as a sibling, and then two sisters, and then he introduces the mum and says, kind of like, unfortunately, she hasn't left the house in over 7 years. And then her first scene is him saying that, a voiceover, and then he is giving her breakfast, a full, we'd say full English, which is, like bacon and eggs and toast or whatever. So he's giving her a full English while he, as the thin son, sips a cup of coffee. And he mentioned previously she was the prettiest girl in town. Now, if that's not kind of like, watch out, you can go from the prettiest girl in town to this sideshow freak of a human. You better be terrified of becoming fat, getting fatter, because you're going to end up like that, and it's not even going to escape the prettiest girl in town. The next scene, so I'm going to tell you every scene that she's in. The next scene is they're having spaghetti for dinner. Remember that spaghetti thing? We'll talk about it again in a little bit. And so 2 scenes that she's in already, both she's eating. Johnny Depp lifts up a little kid to gawk at mama, as she's been handed another plate of food straight after dinner. And then, so Johnny Depp is lifting a little kid up and kind of laughing about it. And then the handy person is like, hey, that's not very kind. And he's like, whatever. The next scene with her is at the dinner table. They're talking about food. And then Johnny Depp notices that the floor is collapsing from the mum's size. I remember this so clearly, thinking, am I making my house collapse from my size? And I must have been, not even 10 years old watching this film, that she is so big that the house is collapsing under her weight. So they go down into the basement, and they Mama comes back from the toilet and she sits back down in her chair, and it's this huge kind of bang thud of her and the dust falling from the ceiling, and being like, oh God, the joists of the house are close to collapsing because of her. And it's not like, it's really framed in a not a compassionate way, right? So from there, she falls asleep. Gilbert, which is Johnny Depp, tries to turn off the TV while she's holding the remote, and he tries to slip it out of her hand and turn it off, and she kind of stirs and wakes up and is like, oh, what are you doing? And that was really kind of felt like she was this giant, an ogre, and he was the person trying to come in and rescue the princess from his grasp. That's what it felt like, of this, don't wake them, because then they're going to rage, because all fat people are interested in is watching talk show TV. Next scene with her is watching a movie, and she has popcorn. So far in almost every single scene here, she is eating food. And then we have a scene where the Leonardo DiCaprio goes to prison, and she goes to, she leaves the house and asks to be driven to the police station to get the son out of prison. And so when she walks into the police station, people are gawking. By the way, I remember her being, when I watched this movie, I remember her being really, really big. And now I paid and watched the movie again, and I was like, what? She's a supersized person, but not in the sense that in the end of this scene, pretty much the whole town gathers to look at her. And, this is set in, this is in the 90s and a small community. So maybe, and obviously fat people, that does happen. That gawking does happen. But the framing of her fatness is exaggerated, right? So as she leaves the police station, and the town people are gathering to witness, and the children are laughing at the sight of a fat body. One man takes a picture. And so there's the kind of the real lived reality of, even though it's overdone, of what it's like to be a fat person. And the mum has a nice personality, right? The mum is seen as loving and kind and that type of stuff. And so you see that kind of empathy. We're walking in the same shoes as Mama as she is being humiliated by the townspeople. Then the next shot, they couldn't help themselves. The next shot is the car driving down the road, heavily tilting to one side. And so it's we're telling such an empathetic story, and we really love Mama. And then you're making the joke out of, the filmmaker is making a joke out of Mama by showing that, but look at how fat she is in the car, that it's tilting to one side. They could have just shown Mama in the car without the tilting, because the tilting was the mocking. So the next scene is dinner. The sister throws a potato at a kid looking through the window, the same kids as before, and Gilbert laughs because he thinks it's hilarious to laugh at his mum. And then we see a scene where she's doing crafts for Leonardo DiCaprio's birthday, and that's the only time that until this point that we have seen that she's not eating, apart from the police scene, right? It's not around eating. So the movie ends with it's Arnie's birthday, Leonardo DiCaprio's 18th birthday, and she meets Johnny Depp's new girlfriend. She apologizes for her appearance. I haven't always been like this. And she then walks up the stairs into bed, and she doesn't walk up the stairs normally, but she walks up the stairs. She goes to bed, and then she dies. She is so young in this movie. She must be 30, 35. The coroner comes and says, we're going to need some more men. Gilbert says it's going to take a crane to get her out of here. When I watched this movie as a kid, I was like, that is legitimate. They are going to need to take a crane to get her out. Now I'm like, no, it would have taken 3 people, put her in a dolly with some wheels, take her down the stairs through the front door. How does she get through the front door when she left to get the son from prison, from jail? The same way, you know? Like in my mind, I was like, yeah, when I was a kid, yeah, well, how, 100 men couldn't lift a woman that size. And I mean, no. And that, we're going to need a crane to take the roof off the house to get her out. Talk about dehumanizing. Johnny Depp finally says, I'm not going to let her be a joke, and decides to take everything out of the house and then burn the house with her in it. And that was so that the crowd didn't see the shame of Mama. And theoretically, that's what Mama would have preferred. But would Mama have preferred that? Them to burn down their family home so they have nowhere to live? That she has no resting place. She doesn't have like a grave or a ceremony or a funeral or anything. They just burn the house with her in it. Would that have been her wishes? I don't know. So yeah, even though that film was, I was like, that is such a good film. It's so compassionate towards fat people. It's not. It's that fake compassion of, oh look, this is why. Oh, look at this fat person. She's fat. And by the way, the story is that her husband had died by suicide a number of years earlier, and she has mental health issues because of that. And we don't know why she's living in a bigger body, because apparently she used to be a beauty queen and they show a picture of her and she was straight-sized. So I don't know if they're insinuating that grief makes someone fat, which is another trope, which is the same in The Whale, is that grief makes people fat, and that fatness is a sign of mental illness. When there is, that could be the case, but there are hundreds of reasons why people are fat, and it's just a way that human beings are. Fatness is just a normal way for human beings to be. So in both of those films, they're framing fatness as a mental health condition, and we're being compassionate towards them because it was and in The Whale, the Brendan Fraser's boyfriend dies by suicide too. So, yeah. By the way, the actor who plays Mama wasn't wearing a fat suit, was a real life super fat human, and the director saw her on I don't know, some talk show, Sally Jessio Raphael or something like that. And, Mama dies in it, and she's like, I don't know, 30, 40 plus, 40 max. And there's no kind of like, why did she die? What the heck? It was just like, oh, she's dead, obviously, because she's fat. The real actor lived to 69. So I'm like, yeah, thumb in your nose at everyone who was like, you're gonna die any second. So the other movie that I want to talk about is Seven. And so Seven is a crime, horror, thriller type movie. Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, they're detectives, and there's a murderer who is killing people because they have committed a sin, one of the 7 deadly sins. So there's like sloth and wrath and pride, and gluttony is one of them. And so we have a scene where they are, it's the first murder, I think, in the show, and they go to a suspected murder, and so they go into a house which is seemingly filthy, a squalid apartment. Maybe he was a hoarder. It's dark, you can't really see, but it was very unpleasant. And he had stacks of spaghetti sauce cans in the kitchen. The guy, he had 2 TVs on, one on top of the other, one playing a talk show. Surprise, surprise. And he has died because he's eaten spaghetti. So his face was face down in some spaghetti. Same thing that Mama was eating spaghetti. I don't know what it is. Like, I always find it interesting, the things that people think are unhealthy, you know, or think is a fat person food. And like, for me, spaghetti bolognese was always kind of like a boring, you know, Tuesday night dinner type thing. Like, spaghetti was never seen as this, ooh, you know, we shouldn't be eating this food. And so I've never perceived it as that. And I've never been very drawn to spaghetti, because luckily that's one of the things that I wasn't told was quote unquote unhealthy. But it's really interesting to see other people's perception of what is unhealthy or bad. And so in these 2 examples, it's spaghetti. By the way, spaghetti is not bad. It's great. Spaghetti bolognese is a really good meal, and it has all of the things that we need in there. We've got vegetables, we've got carbs and protein and fat, and it's a good meal. So anyway, so the 7, like a quote of what this thing is, they say is a morbidly shut in a roach-infested hovel. He dies of internal hemorrhaging after the killer force feeds him until he bursts. So the idea is that the killer's gone there and taken the thing that he eats, which was because he had that loads of cans of spaghetti sauce that he potentially hoarded, and so makes him eat the thing that he's already eating because he's so greedy and gluttonous, and so he needs to die. The actor Bob Mack was 480 pounds, but was also wearing extra prosthetics, aka a fat suit, to make him bigger. You know, that there's a scene where, you know, they approach him. It's the first sight of his body, and his huge back with the tiny chair. It was very cartoon-like, you know, this depiction of fatness, and really making him look as gargantuan as possible. I mean, it's a thriller, and they really are making this body look as horrifying as possible. And then we go to an autopsy scene. No dignity is given to the man. And the first thing that Brad Pitt says is, how'd that fat fuck ever get out the door? Morgan Freeman replies, please, it's obvious he was a shut-in. I mean, it's fatphobia and ableism in one. And yeah, so that the idea of the same thing, the quote shut-in fat person watching reality TV, eating tons of food, dirty place, the only things that they get up to is eating food, watching reality TV, masturbating, you know, these things. There's no personality to these characters. And then obviously framing that watching reality TV or talk shows and masturbating and eating food are bad things. I mean, that sounds like a really fucking good Friday evening to me, you know? But attributing to those to like characteristics of a fat person, which is not helpful, in further understanding fatness. So yeah, I asked my audience, you know, what are other shows like this or movies, and a lot of people said Shallow Hal. Shallow Hal used to be one of my favorite films, and that goes to show how fatphobic I was. A lot of people said Friends, Pitch Perfect, Love Actually, The Nutty Professor, Norbit. Yeah, lots. I mean, if you go back into film and TV archives of fatness, 9 out of 10, it's going to be portrayed as comic relief, something disgusting, something sad. Very rarely is it going to be joyful and not about their weight, you know? Shallow Hal was just egregious. And Jack Black was in there. That's what I was like. I love Jack Black, but why the fuck did he have to do that? That, you know, it makes me, yeah, makes me not like him, and I wish he'd. I don't know if he has ever, but come out and said, "Hey, that film was fucked up. I should never have done that." And as well, when we think about that, the idea of fat suits, right, and why they're problematic. So I'm going to read a couple of things. So here's a quote from a nylon piece. So in September, American Crime Story impeachment star Sarah Paulson expressed her regret for wearing a fat suit for her portrayal of former civil servant Linda Tripp. It's very hard for me to talk about this without feeling like I'm making excuses, she told the LA Times. I think fat phobia is real. I think pretending otherwise causes further harm and is a very important conversation to be had. Which was great that Sarah Paulson said that, but it would have been even greater if she had let the role go to someone who was fat. Other thing about The Whale is that the director said we could not cast someone who was 600 pounds in the film because they would not be able to do it. They would not be able to handle filming because apparently everyone who is 600 pounds is not... There's no 600-pound people out there who are not incredibly talented actors and well able to go to work, live lives, do normal everyday activities. And even if they needed accommodations, the toll that wearing that fat suit had on Brendan Fraser, he apparently had to sit with 2 bags of ice underneath his fat suit. It would take 10 hours to get him into the fat suit and was deeply uncomfortable. He was really, really hot. It was just an awful experience for him. And think about those accommodations and those things that they were doing to make Brendan Fraser look fat when they could have just hired a fat actor. And then, oh, maybe we would have to, you know, tweak something here and there, but ain't no one who could do it, is what the director says, which is another sign of the director's deep misunderstanding of fat people and the lives of super fat people, because he thinks that every fat person is like Charlie, or every super fat person is, you know, masturbating and eating food and doesn't leave their apartment, you know. And hey, if that's what someone's life is, and that's fine as well, right? But Darren cannot see that is a trope. Okay, so continuing, Aubrey Gordon of Your Fat Friend explained it best in a 2018 article pegged to Netflix insatiable series. Like water on stone, those narratives chip away at our collective ability to see fat people as fully human. People who get married, get divorced, make mistakes, have regrets, overcome barriers, triumph and suffer. When we don't see those stories, we forget they are real, even when they're happening every day in the lives of our fat partners, neighbors, friends, and family. Overwhelmingly, fat people and people with eating disorders were clear. Fat suit narratives insult fat people, present harmful images of us, and trigger relapses in eating disorders. Those points, by and large, weren't disputed by anyone, but many responses sought to defend specific projects that you had used fat suits, and largely their defenders weren't fat themselves. So fat suits are dehumanizing, and I mean, there's a difference between someone who is Fat Monica from Friends, where the fat suit was a comic device, saying like, oh God, look how bad she used to be, and LOL, fatness is so funny. And also there's the portrayal of it in dramas and it not necessarily being a comedy device. And I feel like that's less harmful, but still really fucking harmful, because, you know, they might be like, well, there's no fat actors to play these roles. And it's because there's no fat actors because thin actors keep taking the roles of fat actors and then putting on a really shit prosthetic suit. Blah. Blah to all of that. So yeah, I hope you don't go and see The Whale. I mean, do what you want, but I think, you know, if you are a fat person, it will probably deepen any fat phobia that you are working to overcome, because we are all fat phobic. If you are a straight sized person, go and give them money that you would spend on a cinema ticket to a fat rights organization like NAFA, NAAFA, or ASDA, ASDAH. I mean, maybe you want to go and watch it for research purposes. And, you know, whatever, but still, it's harmful to us. It's harmful to everyone. And I think it's had a limited release a few days ago, and it's on full release 21st of December. If we can vote with our feet, that would be great. But, you know, I think a lot of thin people will probably really want to see it, because I know when I was deep in fat phobia, I'd be watching shows like The Biggest Loser and using that to make myself feel better about myself. At least I'm not like them, you know? And then thinking I understood their lives because they were portrayed on a TV show, which is 100% real and not edited at all. Yeah, so thanks for hanging out with me today. Links for everything that I spoke about in the show notes. Remember, if you want to come to the Dominican Republic with me, come. It'll be fun. It's going to be good. See you in the next episode. Okay, see you later. Crocodile, stay fierce, fatty.
Perfect.